The South China Sea is a third larger than the Mediterranean, with 250 islands, atolls and reefs. China is expanding its claims to ownership, especially in the territory of the Philippines.
China claims that these territories belong to China. We dispute that, and that's where the problem is.
China's naval fleet is the largest in the world, and it's increasingly threatening Philippine ships. Under President Ferdinand Marcos Jr, the Philippines has been aligning itself more closely with the United States.
Our president has already expressed his clear statement that regardless of level of aggression that they're going to do, we're not going to surrender a square inch of our territory to any foreign power.
Why this big political change in the Philippines? China has not threatened to use force to settle the matter of the occupied islands and reefs.
Here, the danger is ever greater that a smouldering conflict between Beijing and Washington could ignite into a global crisis. The South China Sea, part of which is known in the Philippines as the West Philippine Sea. Surrounded by China, Taiwan and the Philippines, it's the site of a power struggle between Washington and Beijing. Experts warn that this regional dispute has global implications.
This battle to defend the West Philippine Sea is not our battle alone. The world has a stake here because if China succeeds, then it will overturn the UN Charter. We will go back to might is right era.
But Beijing has its own interpretation of the founding document of the United Nations. Zhou Bo is a retired colonel in China's People's Liberation Army.
China considers the islands, reefs and waters of the South China Sea to belong to China. So the expansion is happening on our own territory, and that's our business.
Beijing justifies its maritime ambitions with what's known as the 9-dash line, which has been marked on Chinese maps since the 1940s. From China's perspective, it's evidence of centuries-old territorial claims.
You cannot say that 2,000 years ago we are passing through this, our fishermen were there, there was a shipwreck there of our traders, so it's ours. No, I mean, all historical claims have been extinguished.
In 2013, the Philippines took China to court over the matter. 3 years later, the Court of Arbitration in The Hague ruled that under international maritime law, Beijing had no claim to areas within the Philippine Economic Zone. But China has ignored that ruling. One hotspot of the conflict is the Scarborough Shoal, which China occupied in 2012. It's located 220 kilometres from Luzon, the main island of the Philippines, and some 800 kilometres from the Chinese island of Hainan. The area's rich fishing grounds add an economic factor to the dispute. US security expert and retired Colonel Ray Powell served in the region.
Now, the Philippines faces, I think, the hardest problem of all of those because of the Philippines' unique geography in the West Philippine Sea that has so many of these places that have been turned into Chinese strongholds. It's basically being blockaded out of Scarborough Shoal. If you are a Philippine fisherman, the first thing you have to worry about is the China Coast Guard showing up or the maritime militia showing up or both showing up.
One such fisherman is Ptolomeo Forones. He's one of the few who dared to keep sailing deep into territory occupied by China. He also testified to the Court of Arbitration.
I'm fighting for our rights, our sovereign rights here in the Philippines. We're justified in fighting for what's ours. It doesn't belong to them.
After 16 hours at sea, his boat reaches the Scarborough Shoal and its fish-rich lagoon. Chinese Coast Guard ships patrol the area. They hinder the crew from fishing in the lagoon.
The Chinese Coast Guard is over there, about a mile away.
1 mile maybe, or less than 1 mile ang layo.
I counted 4 of their ships earlier.
The Chinese have already driven some of the local fishing boats away. It's very different now compared to what it used to be like. Scarborough is no longer a peaceful place. It used to be calm around here. We weren't afraid of anything. Now they drive us away, and there's nothing we can do about it. It's like they stole it. I don't even know if it belongs to them now.
Our right to it is only on paper. That's the reality of the court ruling. It was just a win on paper.
The long and expensive journey is only worth it if the fishing crew can work here for several days. These waters are so rich with fish that there's a fresh catch every few minutes. Snapper, parrotfish or grouper, fish that bring in a good profit at market. But the crews are in constant danger of being chased off by the Chinese Coast Guard.
There are a lot of them here, mostly Coast Guard. That one over there is Coast Guard.
The blue one?
No, not the blue one.
The white one?
Yes, the white one over there. That one hassles us all the time. Of course we're intimidated. Their ships are made of metal and ours of bamboo. They'd break easily, and then how would we get home? And if the Chinese drove us away, what would become of us? We wouldn't even be able to afford a few kilos of rice.
For fishermen like Ptolomeo Foronis, the Scarborough Shoal is not only a vital source of food and income, it's a piece of their home. For China, meanwhile, it's another step towards gaining full control of the South China Sea.
China has also been dredging our seabed and in an example of adding insult to injury, using these marine resources of the Philippines to create artificial islands within the West Philippine Sea and then militarize them and then use that to claim that this is part of her territory.
The South China Sea was a body of water with a bunch of small islands and rocks, and yet in the past decade turned into a body of water with large military bases.
On the Paracel Islands and the Spratly Islands, Beijing has occupied reefs and built up sandbanks into artificial islands. These have been turned into military outposts, complete with harbours, missile systems, radar stations and airstrips for fighter jets.
They have military air and naval bases in the Spratlys, in the Paracels, but they don't have in the Scarborough area. To control the entire South China Sea, you must put up an air and naval base in Scarborough because you have to cover the entire South China Sea with your cruise missiles and your fighter jets. And that's very crucial to take over Taiwan. That's why they really forced their way into Scarborough Shoal.
Another consequence of Beijing's militarization of the South China Sea is the danger it poses to global trade. This sea route is used for 1/3 of the world's trade, including for raw materials like iron ore, copper and natural gas bound for China, and electronics, clothing and cars bound for Europe and North America. Plus, there are large and previously untapped deposits of gas and oil under the seabed. the Philippines considers these vital.
Because of the fact that we have limited resources, we need international trade routes. We need the resources in our 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone to guarantee our food security and energy security, and to guarantee our country's resilience. For China, on the other hand, it is a question of hegemony and growth.
Former President of the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte, best known for his violent war on drugs, was seen as China-friendly. During his time in office, Beijing expanded its presence in Philippine waters. In 2022, Ferdinand Marcos Jr became president. Before the election, it seemed that Marcos planned to continue with Duterte's pro-China stance.
Relations between China and the Philippines under former President Duterte were generally good. The current government under President Marcos Jr has dramatically changed its attitude towards China. Overall, it's not very friendly towards China. I suspect that has something to do with the tensions between the US and China.
The predecessor of this government, Duterte, was very pro-China, right? I mean, I would say he single-handedly almost turned over the Philippines to Chinese interests.
After Duterte's 6-year rule, President Marcos Jr changed course, seeking stronger political and economic ties with Western partners, especially the United States. It's a change that even government critics like journalist Maria Ressa welcome.
I think the Philippines has always had strategic value, right? It's part of the reason that Western nations retained their relationship with the Duterte administration. And I think now you're seeing a kind of, in terms of diplomatic relations, certainly the diplomatic community seems happier. But will the balance of power globally, of geopolitical power, is shifting. I would say our president, a second Marcos Jr., cares about what the rest of the world thinks. He cares about international alliances. He has traveled more than any other president that we have had, and continues to look at this, has signed agreements.
President Marcos Jr is standing up to the Philippines' powerful neighbour. The message is clear, even if he doesn't always mention China by name.
I stated at the start of my administration that we would not yield 1 inch of territory to any foreign power. In recent years, the Philippines has been at the receiving end of illegal, aggressive, and irresponsible actions in the West Philippine Sea.
Manila is steeling itself for a new and extremely powerful opponent.
Filipinos are wary of conflict. I am wary of conflict. We do not want war. And so it is really a strategic crossroads. I see it as a danger because China is really disingenuous. It has a motive. The motive is to acquire dominion over the whole of the South China Sea and perhaps even the Philippines. My call is to build a robust deterrent and a robust defense architecture. And fortunately, we have had clear guidance from our Commander-in-Chief, the President.
One reason President Marcos Jr can act with such confidence is that he can rely on Washington's support. Since 1951, the US and the Philippines have had a treaty similar to that of the NATO alliance, with each country committed to defend the other. Since 1991, the two nations have carried out joint annual military drills. The exercises are named Balikatan, which means shoulder to shoulder. They also took place during the Duterte's presidency, but under Marcos Jr, they've been expanded. In April 2023, 17,600 soldiers took part, the largest joint exercise to date.
How can a country like the Philippines, without nuclear arms, with a weak military, fight a country that is nuclear armed with the largest naval fleet in the world to prevent that country from grabbing its territory in maritime zones? How? One, you have to use international law. Second, you have to use your mutual defense treaty if you have.
In 2014, Washington and Manila signed the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, or EDCA. It gives US forces access to 5 Philippine military bases where they can station troops and equipment. Marcos Jr.'s predecessor, Duterte, tried unsuccessfully to terminate the agreement. After his election victory, Marcos Jr. travelled to Washington. He and US President Joe Biden agreed to expand the defence pact to include 4 more bases.
I think the Philippines has actually endangered its own national security. Because in the event of a war, if the Philippines allows US forces to attack China from Philippine territory, then these US bases on Philippine soil will surely be targeted by China as well. So it's not good for the Philippines.
If there were to be such a conflict between the US and China, the Philippines and its 115 million residents would find themselves on the front line.
We have no choice because their expansionist activities, their harassment, their shadowing, their bullying, their illegal and illegitimate activities continue. It's a big country, it's a powerful country. We are a small archipelagic country. Leave us be.
Cagayan is the northeasternmost province of the Philippines. It's just a few hundred kilometres away from Taiwan and China. That proximity makes China its most important trading partner. Now, 2 new US military bases are to be set up here under the EDCA Pact with the United States. Some local politicians aren't happy, including Cagayan Governor Manuel Mamba.
The top performing governor, who is the major author of all major developments in the province of Cagayan, will also deliver. Honorable Governor Manuel Mamba.
We decide for the interests of our country, our province, our respective towns, and of course our family.
Manuel Mamba has been a mayor, a congressman, and is now in his 3rd term as governor. On Mondays, following a flag ceremony, his team starts the week with a Zumba session. Despite controversies and legal problems, he's seen as a man of the people. Mamba has been shaping the politics of his province for decades.
From the very start, EDCA site was not welcome as far as I am concerned. Foreign forces in the province, I am opposed to it. I will go on, stand against war and against any foreign forces stationed in the province. These are superpowers. And when superpowers clash, it's the small people like us, the small, who will be suffering a lot. Especially for us here, we're closest to Taiwan, if that is where it would ignite.
Cagayan is a popular destination for Chinese tourists, and it continues to attract investment from China.
China is the 2nd biggest economy in the world, so important. We could provide them beef, we could provide them meat, we could provide them vegetables and even fruits. Since I became governor in 2016, it has always been looking northward. We see hope, we see economic ties, we see international trade by looking northward of our province.
The governor's friendly stance towards China has caused him a lot of trouble.
I was even suspected to be pro-China. I'm not pro-China. I am pro-Philippines. I am pro-Cagayan. I am accused of buying boats. I never bought boats in my entire political career. And the people and the electorates of Cagayan know that. And I hope that my stand on EDCA has nothing to do with this.
The governor cannot prevent the new US bases. One of the 4 is being established in Santa Ana, in the far north of his province. But a military presence already exists in the coastal town. Student activists Ranj, Jules and Ariel have travelled to the area to find out whether there have been any human rights violations committed by the military.
Our history has shown us how the American and Chinese militaries have treated Filipino citizens. Military presence has come with prostitution and human rights violations in general. That's what we have to watch out for with these military bases.
The 3 activists are part of a young, globally connected and well-informed generation. They don't want to be controlled by either China or the US. The beaches and jungles of the nearby island of Palau were recently used for US-Philippine military exercises. The island is also home to a Philippine naval outpost.
This boat has the naval logo on it. It looks like there are no officers around, just island residents. The EDCA sites are a sensitive topic, so we have to be careful.
According to human rights organisations in the Philippines, 89 people critical of the government have been killed in the past 2 years. 18 have been tortured and 13 have gone missing.
The government has always campaigned against activists, calling them, communist sympathizers. This has turned into the phenomenon called red tagging. A lot of activists, such as those opposing the Philippine military, have ended up harmed or dead, particularly for something like communities affected by Balikatan or EDCA.
The women conduct interviews to document how residents are being affected by the Balikatan military exercises and the EDCA Defence Alliance. They publish their findings in their student newspaper and on TikTok.
So, Cagayan is close to Taiwan. Do you think your security as a Cagayan resident will be endangered if EDCA sites are established here?
Yes, because we don't know what will happen. We think about things like bombs and all that. We're certainly worried about it. One time, it was really scary. A helicopter landed in the rice fields. We didn't know there were American soldiers inside it. We had no idea what they were doing here.
What went through your mind?
We thought a war with China had broken out.
For years, organisations like Human Rights Watch have warned that the rights of residents are being put at risk by the Security Pact and the military exercises.
The people in the EDCA sites fearing loss of livelihood, fearing displacement. I mean, those are real issues. I think there is a need for civil society organizations, for human rights organizations to really monitor what's happening in these EDCA sites and how the Mutual Defense Treaty and EDCA is being enforced.
Was there any consultation with your community? Or did you suddenly find out about the construction of the EDCA sites?
Yes, it was quite sudden. When we found out about EDCA, we thought a war was about to break out.
They're too strong. We wouldn't stand a chance. We're afraid we'll get caught up in a war.
We're concerned because as young people, we're the next generation. We're worried about what kind of society we'll inherit.
Despite improvements in human rights under President Ferdinand Marcos Jr, it's still dangerous to criticise the government and the military.
We are not a dictatorship which can whip people into line, unlike China, which has no freedom of the press, no freedom of speech. They can manipulate their population into believing a storyline. Filipinos have the freedom of choice to believe, which is why having almost 80 to 90% conservatively of Filipinos believing in the justness of the cause that we are fighting for in the West Philippine Sea.
Tensions with China also dictate the political agenda in the Senate of the Philippines, one of Asia's oldest democracies. Even opposition leader and Social Democratic Senator Risa Hontiveros supports the president's course.
This issue of the West Philippine Sea is the one that unites almost all, if not all, Filipinos, regardless of who we voted for in the election. The possibility of a wider or hot conflict breaking out. No one wants to go to war.
This sense of national unity has given rise to a patriotic movement. Atin Ito, or This Is Ours, is a rallying cry aimed at defending Philippine territory. The citizens' movement organises benefit concerts, collects donations and uses aid convoys to support fishing communities affected by the Chinese blockade. At the end of 2023, Senator Risa Hontiveros travelled to the fishing village of Masinloc for an event organised by the Atin Ito movement. Fishing communities have experienced the tensions firsthand, and their accounts carry political weight. Fisherman Tolomero Forones also lives here. He's respected because of the testimony he gave against China.
If you remember, Mr. Tolomeo was one of those who gave a statement for our case at the tribunal.
You helped us to win the case.
6 gave testimony.
Wow, impressive.
I wanted to introduce him to you.
Thank you so much.
We won, madam.
We did.
But nothing came of it.
No, not nothing. Because of the victory you played a part in, we now have a proposed bill in the Senate called the Maritime Zones Bill. It's also supported by the Coast Guard so that the tribunal's decision in our favour can be enforced. We may think nothing came of it, but we now have more allies and regional alliances that support us.
Visits like this aren't just for solidarity. There are also midterm elections in 2025.
dyan. Sabi ko kay maupili ngayong umaga. Matagal na po namin.
We've wanted to visit Masinloc for a while now because we know that you're on the front lines.
Alam na alam po namin kayo ang
You've stood up to China's expansionism in the West Philippine Sea.
pero tumitindig.
So, a big round of applause to all of you.
Sa West Philippine Sea. Kaya palakpakan po natin kayong lahat.
The state and civil society are united against China.
Thanks to the efforts of our president, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., along with the Senate and the Congress, the fishing community here in Masinloc isn't being left to face its worries alone. All members of the Congress and the Senate, regardless of their political leanings, are united in condemning the actions of the People's Republic of China.
We'll send this to the Chinese embassy.
The global order that was established after this First and Second World War will be set aside if we're going to allow countries like China, pretty much like Russia, in disregarding international law. Our president has already expressed his clear statement that regardless of level of aggression that they're going to do, we're not going to surrender a square inch of our territory to any foreign power.
Those making a living from fishing are among the poorest here. They may be admired for being on the front lines of the conflict, but they feel abandoned, left to face the Chinese threat alone. Tolomero Foronas is frustrated too.
Nothing has changed since 2012. It's always the same. The Chinese Coast Guard is still harassing us. This is the affidavit of testimony in the case fighting for the West Philippine Sea under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. We won, but the ruling wasn't enforced, so it's not worth any more than the paper it's printed on. We're surviving, but we're so thin because we hardly get anything to eat. They keep driving us away. All we have is this diplomatic process. Enough already. The diplomatic process isn't getting us any results. We still have to protest. We have to defend ourselves. It's so frustrating to deal with thieves who take what's not theirs.
The Chinese blockade has affected his whole family. His son, Archimedes, hasn't gone to the Scarborough Shoal for years, and Ptolomeo no longer ventures there either. Both men now only fish in coastal waters. To go further would be too dangerous.
What can we do? We can no longer go to Scarborough, and there aren't many fish around here. Not like at Scarborough, where you could catch 100 kilos in a day. I'm okay with what President Marcos Jr. is doing. At least this way there's some control. With the US military presence in the area, China is being more careful.
From time to time, Philippine authorities detain Chinese ships, much to the satisfaction of locals.
They apprehended a big Chinese boat, but the crew was sent back to China after they were caught fishing in Philippine waters.
Ptolomeo's cousin Efren is also a fisherman. Despite the danger, he continues to travel to the Scarborough Shoal. He's just returned from a 2-week trip.
You still can't go near it?
When we were there was a Chinese Navy boat. It kept blocking our path. It was scary. We were about 30 miles away. Maybe it will take a war to get them to leave.
That's our last chance. The last option. Go to war. Fight back, come what may.
They won't leave of their own accord.
For Ptolomeo Phoronis, it's a continual struggle, both for the survival of his family and for the future of his homeland. In the capital, Manila, growing anti-Chinese sentiment is on full display during events to mark Philippines' Independence Day, with attendees shouting, "The Philippines is ours, China leave." In a survey in spring 2024, almost 80% of respondents said that they would defend their country in the event of an attack.
We have a Chinese leader who thinks that he can get his way, he can aggrandize himself and his country by grabbing the territory of other countries. I mean, he thinks that he has enough nuclear weapons, he has the largest naval fleet in the world, he has spent so much on the military.
If China becomes more aggressive, then its true nature will be finally, the emperor's clothes will finally be revealed. No, it's already translucent anyway. A transparent view of China will finally be revealed to the whole world. So its reputation will go down the drain.
China has about 150 patrol boats. The Philippines has 25. So it employs other strategies, including turning to the media. The government posts footage of naval confrontations on social media. The aim is to raise awareness among the population, drum up international support, and damage China's image.
The simple matter of turning on the cameras flips the information warfare 180 degrees, because all of a sudden, what was deniable is absolutely undeniable. It's actually the easiest kind of information warfare in some senses. Right now, it is having this really extreme reputational damage on the international stage. A country that wants to cast itself as the champion of the global South is really visibly pushing around a developing country in its own neighborhood.
As part of this strategy, vacation trips to the disputed maritime regions have recently been permitted. In March 2024, a wooden boat carrying 60 bloggers, tourists and journalists left from a port on Palawan Island. Their destination? Thitu Island, known in the Philippines as Pag-asa, part of the Spratly archipelago. The 505-kilometre crossing to the country's most remote territory takes 32 hours. On the way, a Chinese warship appeared and pursued the boat.
They're just probably following us or something. I don't know. We're not going to allow them to stop us, right? Yeah.
After a few hours, the Chinese ship turned away. Pag-asa means hope. In 2002, the Philippines settled civilians here to support its territorial claim. It's the smallest municipality in the Philippines and the only inhabited island of the Spratly archipelago. China also claims the island, and Chinese fishing trawlers surround it as though laying siege. The Chinese Coast Guard and Navy also patrol the area. The message seems to be, we're keeping an eye on you and we're ready to act. For many of the tourists, the journey here is both an adventure and a patriotic mission.
I thought there's no single issue or social matter that would unite our country. But speaking of Spratly, I'm very much surprised that everyone is in agreement that we have to fight for this island. So personally, I am inspired and I'm happy, and I've never been proud to call myself a Filipino.
250 civilians and 50 Coast Guard and naval personnel live here.
I wanted to talk to people. They are the stewards of this island. They take care of this island, and they protect this island for us. I wanted to get the information firsthand because I wanted to write something about it and post it in social media, and hopefully it will get noticed, you know. Hopefully a lot of people will read about it.
For visitors like Mel Pastor, the realities of life here came as a shock. From morning to night, Chinese ships cruise around the island, which the Chinese call Zongge.
How I feel right now, I'm scared touring my own country because I see a lot of threats. It makes me angry that I can't do anything freely in my own country, you know? There's a lot of islands here that we want to visit, but we can't. Because why? There are Chinese ships. And what the are they to stop us? We're supposed to go anywhere we want because this is our country, but we can't do it, unfortunately. They're there, they're guarding us. And not just Coast Guard, Navy ships, you know? Warships are here. What this is supposed to mean?
Every night, those on shore can see the navigation lights and searchlights of Chinese vessels moored off the island. 225 kilometres southeast of Pag-asa is another hotspot, the second Thomas Shoal. The reef is home to the Sierra Madre, a rusting ship that functions as an outpost of the Philippine military.
In 1999, they took this World War II ship and they ran it aground at Second Thomas Shoal. And the Philippines has continuously manned that ship ever since 1999 and has essentially said this is an outpost. And so every month to 6 weeks, it has to go out and rotate the troops and resupply the outpost.
For 2 decades, there was a de facto truce between Beijing and Manila regarding the Sierra Madre. The Philippines was able to bring supplies to its troops and carry out repair work on the ship. In return, Manila didn't complain about the Chinese Coast Guard in its waters. But under President Ferdinand Marcos Jr, the rusting hulk has become a problem for Beijing.
They're trying to bring in building materials to reinforce their broken warship, to make it a permanent outpost on the Second Thomas Shoal on Chinese territory. We can't allow that.
Anything that the Philippines does to bring in a bag of cement to help shore up the Sierra Madre is considered illegal and hence gets a water cannon or gets blocked or rammed or something. The Sierra Madre is almost certainly of greater symbolic value than it is of military or strategic value, because attacking the ship would certainly invoke the armed attack phrase of the U.S.-Philippine Mutual Defense Treaty.
Speaking to foreign journalists in May 2024, President Marcos Jr let the world know just how tense the situation was.
If any serviceman, Filipino serviceman, is killed by an attack from any foreign power, then that is time to invoke the Mutual Defense Treaty. Whatever their designations are, whether they're merchant marine or Coast Guard or actual gray vessels or Navy vessels, it does not matter. That is an attack on the Philippines by a foreign power.
Marcos Jr has Washington's full support, as reiterated by US Ambassador to the Philippines, Mary Kay Carlson.
The Philippines can definitely count on the United States. Well, the Mutual Defense Treaty, as our Secretary of State and President have said many times, would be invoked by an armed attack on public vessels or aircraft or Philippine population anywhere in the Pacific, including the South China Sea.
Even so, there have been increasing confrontations between Philippine and Chinese Coast Guard vessels off the Second Thomas Shoal, including when the ship the Cabra was on its way to provide supplies to the Sierra Madre. Several Chinese boats tried to cut off the Cabra to force it to turn back.
This is Philippine Coast Guard vessel, BRP Cabra, MRRV 4409. You are within Philippine Exclusive Economic Zone and Cagayan Island Group. Your refusal to respond will be reported and will be dealt with accordingly. Over.
The Philippine Coast Guard 9702. This is the China Coast Guard 3303. Your operations here have severely infringed on the marine rights and the interests of China. Stop the operation and leave this sea area immediately. Forward.
U00215. This is Philippine Coast Guard vessel MRRV 4409. You are a state party to UNCLOS. Your actions are illegal. Stop your activity or face the consequence of your action. Over.
The fast-moving ships of the Chinese Coast Guard have no trouble pushing Philippine boats away, manoeuvring around them and using water cannon. Even so, the Cabra managed to carry out its mission. The Philippine government is walking a fine line, attempting to defend its territorial claims while also exercising diplomatic restraint. Both are important because of what's at stake.
Our position has always been that even when the tensions really rose, we had urged all sides to maintain their communication with each other in order to avoid, let's say, any incident getting out of hand.
That restraint is a relief to the Americans, who want to avoid the region becoming a theatre of war.
We have been very impressed by the Philippines' measured response, maximum restraint in the face of these aggressive activities, because egging on or in some way sort of contributing to hostilities will not help.
But in a way, if a conflict breaks out, it will affect all countries in this region and, I suspect, even the world. So we are certainly committed to avoiding conflict.
And yet, in March 2024, the situation did escalate off the Second Thomas Shoal. For the first time, Philippine sailors were injured in clashes.
Philippine officials warned Beijing not to cross Manila's red lines after a Chinese water cannon attack injured 4 Filipino Navy men in the West Philippine Sea.
They're hoping to escalate the Philippines out of it by just sort of, okay, you can't go as hard as we're willing to go. And yet every stage they escalate essentially improves the Philippines' leverage on the international stage.
Whether Manila can hold its position against Beijing long-term depends not only on its ally, the US, but also on the political strength of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. The legacy of former President Rodrigo Duterte casts a long shadow. The International Criminal Court is investigating him for crimes against humanity related to his war on drugs, which some estimates say resulted in the deaths of tens of thousands. Duterte's continued popularity is a dilemma for Marcos. Should he protect his predecessor or take the side of international law?
That might set him on a collision course with Duterte, whose daughter is now the vice president and who is presumed to be running for president in 2028. And the rift between the Dutertes and the Marcoses would widen and would increase the antagonism of the Dutertes against the West and, embrace China even more. A weak state, a weak Philippine government, a weak democracy in the Philippines will not be able to confront the bullying of China, for instance. A weak President Marcos, who has to deal with so many other issues domestically, will not be in a good position to confront China.
The Philippines now finds itself on the front lines of a struggle for geopolitical dominance. The archipelago nation has effectively become a frontier in the Indo-Pacific, one of the world's most volatile maritime regions.